They burned everything I had worked for, my farm, my legacy, my dreams, reducing years of hard work to ash in a single calculated moment. But what the HOA didn't know was that their biggest mistake wasn't torching my land, it was leaving behind a single critical legal document that would become the key to my ultimate revenge. Would they survive the storm they were about to unleash? Comment below where you're watching from. The morning I found the first letter from the HOA stuffed in my mailbox was the day everything started to fall apart. I remember it clearly. The sun was warm on my back as I collected fresh eggs from my hens. Their soft clucking always made me smile. Those chickens were like family to me. After 5 years on my small farm, my 6 acres of heaven sat just outside Pine Creek city limits. I grew the juiciest tomatoes you've ever tasted, kept 15 happy chickens, and even had 2 goats that helped keep the grass trimmed. My grandpa left me this land when he passed, and I turned it into the farm of my dreams, the kind of place where fireflies dance at dusk and the air smells like fresh earth. I was here first, that's the important part. My farm existed long before the fancy houses of Oakridge Estates started popping up next door 3 years ago. These giant homes with perfect lawns and matching mailboxes didn't fit with my weathered barn and veggie gardens, but we all got along fine at first until Karen Whitfield moved in. Is that your rooster making that awful racket at 5 a.m. Those were the first words Karen ever said to me. No hello, no introduction, just complaints about my animals. She stood at our property line and pressed white pants and a blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. That's Harold, and he's just doing his job, I explained with a smile, trying to be neighborly. Farm animals make noise sometimes, that's country living. Karen's lips pinched together like she tasted something sour. This isn't the country anymore, this is Oakridge Estates, and we have standards. I wiped my dirty hands on my jeans and tried reason. Actually, my property isn't part of Oaked. I was here before your development even broke ground. Different zoning laws apply to my land. She squinted at my chicken coop, my vegetable garden, and the small pile of compost near the fence. We'll see about that. I'm on the HOA board now, and we don't allow unsightly farm activities to lower our property values. I should have taken her more seriously. I really should have. The letters started coming weekly after that, official looking papers with the Oakridge Estates logo at the top, listing violations on my property: too many chickens, sightly garden equipment, improper fencing. Each one threatened fines that I had no obligation to pay since I wasn't part of their HOA. I kept every letter in a folder just in case something told me I might need them someday. Then came the complaints about smells. My compost pile sat far from any houses, but Karen insisted it was ruining her backyard experience. She called city officials about my goats. She photographed my property from the road, pointing at chicken feathers that dared float over the property line. My other neighbors from Oaked started acting strange. 2 people who used to wave now looked away when driving past. Mrs. Gonzalez, who'd always bought eggs from me, stopped coming by. Only Lisa Martinez still smiled and chatted when she walked her dog past my place in the evenings. Don't take it personally, Lisa told me one day, leaning on my fence. Karen's been showing pictures of your farm at HOA meetings, saying it's a health hazard. Some people believe her, but others think she's just being difficult. Can she really do anything? I asked. My property is even part of Oakridge. Lisa looked worried. Just be careful. Karen's husband is friends with someone on the county zoning board. She's been talking about getting the boundaries redrawn. I didn't sleep well that night or many nights after. The worst part was I couldn't stay and fight. My mother's health had been failing for months, and she needed me every year. I spent 2 weeks helping her after her treatment, staying at her house 3 hours away. I couldn't cancel this trip. She had no one else. The day before I left, I spotted Karen and 3 men in suits walking along my property line. They carried clipboards and pointed at different areas of my farm. When they saw me watching, Karen smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind that makes your stomach twist with worry. That evening, as I packed my bags, I took extra precautions. I asked my friend Miguel to check on my animals daily. I installed 2 security cameras pointing at the property line and the main areas of the farm. I even called the sheriff's office to let them know I'd be away and had concerns about trespassing. Don't worry so much, Miguel said as he helped me load my truck the next morning. What's the worst that could happen in 2 weeks? As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Karen stood at the edge of her driveway, phone in hand, watching me leave. The sun glinted off something in her garage, what looked like large red containers lined up against the wall. If only I'd turned around right then, if only I'd stayed, but my mother needed me, and I had no idea that those 2 weeks away would cost me everything I loved. What would be waiting for me when I returned? I knew something was wrong the second I turned onto my road. The sky looked dirty, like someone had smudged it with a giant pencil, and that smell like a huge campfire. But worse, much worse. My stomach dropped as I pushed my old truck to go faster. The closer I got to home, the stronger the burnt smell became. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. No, 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 I whispered, praying I was wrong. I wasn't. When my farm came into view, I slammed on the brakes so hard my truck skid. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The beautiful garden I had planted seed by seed gone. The chicken coop I had built with my own 2 hands destroyed. My small Red barn where I kept all my tools and feed nothing but a black skeleton against the sky. Everything was gone, just piles of ash and smoking wood where my life's work had stood just 2 weeks ago. I jumped out of my truck, leaving the door wide open, and ran toward what used to be my chicken coop. The smell of smoke burned my nose and throat. Henrietta Cluck Ruby, I called out, hoping by some miracle my chickens had escaped. Only silence answered me. I fell to my knees in the warm ashes, my jeans getting dirty and wet. 5 years of hard work, of waking up at sunrise and working until my muscles ached, all gone. The vegetable stands where local families would come to buy fresh produce burned to the ground. The special area where I grew flowers for the farmers market, nothing but dirt and ash. My house still stood at the edge of the property, untouched by the fire, but what good was a house when everything that made this place a home was destroyed? I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. A shiny white SUV that looked like it had never seen a speck of dirt pulled up. Out stepped Karen Whitfield, wearing spotless white pants and a blue blouse that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. She didn't look sad or shocked. In fact, was that a tiny smile on her face. Behind her came a balding man in what looked like an expensive suit, carrying a leather folder under his arm. He walked with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. Well, Karen said, looking around at the destruction with what seemed like satisfaction. Looks like the farm problem has been taken care of. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What do you mean taken care of? This is my property, my life. My voice broke as I gestured to the ruins around me. The man cleared his throat and stepped forward. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Gerald Thompson, president of the Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association. He didn't offer to shake my ash-covered hand. While you were away, we held an emergency meeting about the situation your farm was creating for our community. Situation, I repeated, not understanding. Karen jumped in. The smell, the noise, the unsightly view. Do you know how much my property value drops just by being next to this? She waved her manicured hand at what used to be my farm. We've had complaints from every homeowner on this side of the development. Gerald nodded. We sent you 3 notices over the past week. I was taking care of my sick mother, I shouted, feeling my face get hot. I've been gone for 2 weeks. Not our problem, Karen said with a shrug. You should have made arrangements. Gerald opened his leather folder. According to HOA Bylaw 47B, after 3 unanswered notices, we have the right to take action to remedy any situation that affects the community standards and property values. You have no right to touch my farm, I screamed, my whole body shaking. This land isn't even part of your development. I was here first. Karen's smile grew wider, showing perfect white teeth. Actually, the county rezoned this area last month. Your little farm is now officially part of Oakridge Estates, which means she paused for effect. You're subject to our rules now. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Could this possibly be true? I'd never received any notice about rezoning. So you burned down my farm, you killed my animals. I could barely get the words out. That's illegal, that's criminal. Gerald adjusted his tie. We hired a contractor to remove the violations, the chicken coop, compost piles, and non-approved structures. If things got out of hand, he shrugged, perhaps the dry conditions contributed to the spread. I looked behind them and saw other neighbors from the development had gathered at the edge of my property. Some looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. Others were nodding in agreement with Karen. And Gerald, you can't do this, I said, my voice suddenly calm as shock set in. I'll call the police. Go ahead, Karen said. We have all the paperwork, we followed the rules. I started to say something else when a glint of metal caught my eye through the ashes near what used to be the edge of my garden. I could see my property survey marker, the one the county had placed years ago when I first bought the land. It was still firmly planted where it had always been, untouched by the fire. A tiny spark of hope flickered inside me. If the marker was still there in its original spot, then maybe I think you should leave now, I said quietly, not wanting them to see what I'd noticed. Karen laughed. Or what, you'll sick your chickens on us? Oh wait, you can't. Something inside me snapped. I stood up straight, looked her directly in the eyes, and said, you've made a huge mistake, Karen, and you're going to regret it. For just a second I saw uncertainty flash across her face. Then Gerald put his hand on her arm and guided her back toward the SUV. We'll give you some time to process this. You have 30 days to bring the rest of your property into compliance with HOA standards. The rulebook is in your mailbox. As they drove away, I watched the other neighbors drift back to their perfect houses with their perfect lawns, all except one woman who hesitated, looking back at me with what seemed like genuine sadness in her eyes. I turned away and looked again at that survey marker glinting in the sun. Something wasn't adding up about this zoning story, and I was going to figure out what it was, even if it was the last thing I did. The smell of smoke still clung to my clothes as I sat surrounded by papers in my living room. My eyes burned from crying and lack of sleep. 3 days had passed since I found my beloved farm in ashes. 3 days of anger and heartbreak that kept me awake, searching for answers. They can't just burn down someone's property and get away with it, I whispered to myself, flipping through another county zoning document. My fingers trembled as I reached for my coffee mug, my 5th cup today. Something caught my eye on page 43 of the county records. I leaned closer, heart racing. The boundary line, the recent rezoning that Karen mentioned, didn't include my entire property. I jumped up, knocking papers everywhere and ran to my garage where I kept my original property survey. Under the dusty plastic cover was the answer I needed. The creek that ran along the eastern edge of my property formed a natural boundary that the rezoning specifically excluded. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through pictures of my farm before it was destroyed. The chicken coop, the vegetable garden, my small barn, all were on the eastern side of the creek. They burned down property that wasn't even in their jurisdiction. I gasped. I needed more proof. I called the county office as soon as they opened. "This is Maggie from the county recorder's office," a friendly voice answered. "Maggie, I need confirmation about the rezoning of County Road 16 properties last month," I said, my voice urgent. "Specifically the boundary line formed by Willow Creek." "Oh, that rezoning was very specific about natural boundaries," Maggie replied. "Let me email you the official maps right now." Within minutes my printer hummed to life with official county maps showing exactly what I suspected. The HOA had no authority over my farm, none at all. I didn't waste time changing clothes. Still in my wrinkled t-shirt and jeans, I grabbed my documents and drove straight to the county sheriff's office. "I'd like to report illegal destruction of property," I told the deputy at the front desk. His eyes widened as I explained what happened and showed him my evidence. "Ma'am, this is serious," he said, calling over another officer. "We need to take your statement and these documents." 2 hours later, I walked out with a case number and a promise of investigation, but I wasn't done. I knew the Oakridge Estates HOA held their monthly meetings on Thursday evenings. Today was Thursday. I stopped at the copy shop to make duplicates of all my documents, then drove home to shower and change. Tonight would be important. I put on my best jeans and a clean button-up shirt, nothing fancy but respectable. As I combed my wet hair, I practiced what I would say at exactly 7 p.m. I walked into the Oakridge Estates Community Center. About 30 people sat in neat rows facing a long table where Karen and Gerald sat with 3 other board members. Karen was in the middle of complaining about someone's unapproved mailbox color when she spotted me. "This is a private meeting," she snapped, cutting herself off mid-sentence. I smiled and walked to the front of the room. "Actually, as a property owner affected by HOA decisions, I have the right to attend." Gerald cleared his throat. "Hear from non-members at the end of the meeting what I have to say." "Can't wait," I replied, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. I turned to face the homeowners. "Did you all know that your HO burned down my farm illegally, and that you might be personally liable for the damages?" The room fell silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming. "That's not true," Karen said, her face turning red. "Your property was rezoned only partially," I interrupted, pulling out my maps. I unfolded them on an empty chair. In the front row, the official county rezoning specifically excludes the eastern portion of my property where the creek forms a natural boundary. Everything east of the creek, which included my chicken coop garden and barn, remained outside your HOA jurisdiction. People began to murmur. One man in a blue polo shirt stood up to look at my maps. Gerald's face paled as he examined the documents. "We followed the zoning maps provided to us." I pulled out another paper, this hand-drawn map, the one with Karen's signature on it. "This isn't an official document, it's completely wrong." The murmurs grew louder. A woman in the third row stood up, Lisa Martinez, who lived 3 houses down from Karen and always waved when passing my property. "Gerald, did you actually verify the boundaries before authorizing this?" she demanded. "Of course he did." Karen jumped to her feet, her designer bracelet jangling. "That farm was disgusting. Chickens making noise at all hours, that horrible compost smell. It was bringing down our property values." "Property values don't override the law," I said calmly, "and speaking of law, I filed a police report today. Your actions constitute illegal destruction of private property, criminal trespass, and animal cruelty for the chickens that died. You can't prove we did anything," Karen shouted, but I could see fear in her eyes. I pulled out my phone and played a video I'd found on my home security system. It showed a truck with Oakridge Estates HOA on the door arriving at my property 3 days after I left town. The date and timestamp were clearly visible. "I have more footage," I said quietly, "and I've already spoken with 3 reporters who are very interested in how an HOA could make such a serious mistake." Lisa Martinez walked to the front of the room. I motioned to immediately suspend any board members involved in this decision pending investigation. "Second," called out the man in the blue polo shirt. Karen's face went from red to white. "You can't do this. We were protecting our community." Gerald raised his hand weakly. "Perhaps we should consult our attorney before too late," I said. "My attorney will be contacting yours tomorrow, and just so you know, she specializes in property disputes and HOA overreach. She hasn't lost a case in 6 years." I gathered my documents as the meeting erupted into arguments. Some residents were shouting at Karen, others were asking Gerald questions he couldn't answer. I walked calmly toward the exit, but Lisa caught up with me. "I'm so sorry about your farm," she said, touching my arm. "Not all of us are like Karen." "Thank you," I replied, "but this isn't over. They destroyed something precious to me, and they need to make it Right as I drove home my phone rang. The caller ID showed County Sheriff's Office. Ma'am, the deputy said. When I answered, we found something interesting in the fire inspector's report. The blaze wasn't started by the HOA contractors. Someone used gasoline to accelerate it. We're treating this as possible arson. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Arson? Who would do that? But deep down I already had my suspicions. What else would the investigation uncover? And how far had Karen really gone to get rid of my farm? I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing like crazy. 20 missed calls. The first one was from Lisa Martinez. Have you seen the news? She asked. When I called back, your farm is the top story on every channel. People are furious about what the HOA did. I turned on the TV and saw my burned farm on the screen. The reporter stood right where my chicken coop used to be. My hands shook as I turned up the volume. Local farmer returns home to find property destroyed by neighboring HOA. And what legal experts are calling a clear case of overreach, impossible criminal action. The reporter said. My doorbell rang. A different reporter stood there with a camera. Can you tell us how it felt to see your farm destroyed? She asked, shoving a microphone in my face. Words spread like wildfire. By noon my quiet country road was lined with news vans. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors I'd never even met called to offer help. Someone started an online fund for me that hit $10,000 in just 3 hours. I sat at my kitchen table with my cousin Janet, the attorney. She spread out maps and documents. The HOA messed up big time, she said, circling the creek on the map. This natural bound boundary is clearly marked in the rezoning paperwork, is the limit of their control. Everything east of the creek, which includes most of your farm, was never under their power, so they burned down property they had no right to touch. I asked, exactly, and that's not just a civil issue, that's criminal destruction of property. Janet helped me file a lawsuit naming the HOA. Gerald and Karen personally. The sheriff delivered their court papers that same afternoon. I watched from my window as Karen received hers. She threw a fit right there on her front lawn, screaming that I was the one breaking rules, not her. That evening my phone rang again. It was Tom Baker, who lived 3 houses down from Karen. You need to see something, he said. I have security cameras that point toward your property. I caught something disturbing. Tom sent me a video. The timestamp showed 6 a.m. on the day my farm burned down. A familiar white SUV parked near my property line. Karen got out carrying something in her hands. Was that a gas can? I didn't think much of it until I heard what happened. Tom said, I've already called the police. Before I could process this, someone knocked on my door. It was Gerald, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The HOA board had an emergency meeting, he said, his voice shaky. They've removed me as president. Everyone's panicking about your lawsuit. They should be, I replied. Gerald looked down at his shoes. They want to settle. They're offering $50,000 to rebuild. I laughed. My attorney says this is worth 10 times that amount. Please, Gerald begged. Many homeowners had nothing to do with this decision. They'll lose their homes. If you push this, you should have thought about that before burning down my farm. Gerald wiped sweat from his forehead. That's the thing. The HOA only approved removing your compost pile and chicken coop. We hired contractors to do it properly, but then something happened. What do you mean? Karen kept saying the contractors were moving too slowly. She disappeared for an hour that morning. When she came back, she seemed excited. The fire started 30 minutes later. My mind raced back to Tom's video. Karen with the gas can? Are you saying Karen started the fire herself? I asked. Gerald's face went pale. I didn't say that, but the contractors swear they didn't start it, and Karen's been acting strange ever since. After Gerald left, I called Janet again. She arrived within the hour, bringing a private investigator named Mike. If what Gerald hinted at is true, we need to collect evidence quickly. Mike explained security footage, witness statements, anything that shows Karen's movements that day. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Check the pond behind Karen's house. Look for evidence. It wasn't signed Mike, and I walked around the neighborhood. Pond in the reeds, partially hidden, were 2 empty gas cans. Don't touch anything, Mike warned, taking photos. He called the police immediately. That afternoon, the police got a search warrant for Karen's home and car. I watched from across the street as they carried out bags of evidence. Karen stood in her driveway screaming that I was framing her. Later, Lisa came over with dinner. The HOA is falling apart, she said. Half the board has resigned. People are talking about dissolving it completely. What about my farm? I asked. People feel terrible. There's talk about a community rebuild. The next day, a local farmers market group arrived with seedlings and offers to help replant. A contractor offered to rebuild my chicken coop for free. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, but that night things took another turn. My security camera caught someone sneaking onto my property at 2 a.m. It was Karen placing something near what remained of my barn. When police arrived, they found a half-empty bottle of lighter fluid. The officer looked grim. We're taking her in for questioning. As dawn broke, I sat on my porch looking at my destroyed farm. The land looked dead, but I knew that with care it could grow again, just like my fight against the HO. What looked like certain defeat was turning into something else entirely. My phone buzzed with a message from Janet. Turn on your TV now. The local news was showing Karen being led away in handcuffs. The reporter's voice was clear. HOA resident arrested on suspicion of arson in connection with farm property destruction. Gerald's car pulled up. He stepped out holding A thick folder. What you don't know, he said, handing me the folder, is that Karen has been trying to buy your land for months. There are plans to expand Oakridge Estates. Guess who's the silent partner in the development company? I opened the folder and saw Karen's name on the business papers. Next to it was a map showing luxury homes plotted over what used to be my farm. Was this about neighborhood standards, or was it about greed all along? I couldn't sleep that night after Gerald's strange visit. What did he mean about how the fire started at sunrise? I walked through the ashes of my beloved farm one more time when something caught my eye, a glint of metal near where my back fence had stood my security camera. I had completely forgotten about the small weatherproof camera I had installed last year after some local kids had stolen vegetables. With shaking hands, I retrieved the damaged but intact camera. Could it have captured what really happened? My heart pounded as I connected it to my computer. The footage made me gasp. It showed Karen arriving early that morning before any HOA contractors. She wore gloves and carried 2 red gas cans. The video clearly showed her pouring gasoline around my chicken coop, my compost pile, and along the edge of my garden. Then she lit a match. The flames spread faster than she expected. Karen jumped back, looking scared for a moment before running to her car. 20 minutes later, a truck with Valley Landscaping arrived. The HOA contractors. The men looked shocked at the blaze already consuming my farm, but instead of call in for help, they simply left. I called my attorney immediately. I have proof Karen deliberately set the fire herself, I said, my voice trembling with anger and relief. The HOA contractors didn't even do the damage, they just saw it happening and left. This changes everything, my attorney said. This isn't just property damage anymore, it's arson. The next day I sat across from Sheriff Davis as he reviewed the footage. His face grew darker with each passing minute. I've known you for years, he said, finally never caused anyone trouble, but some folks just can't stand seeing others live differently. He shook his head. I'll be paying Miss Whitfield a visit today. Word spread through town like wildfire. Within hours my phone was ringing non-stop. Local news vans parked outside what remained of my farm. I agreed to one interview, standing tall among the ruins, as I explained how my property hadn't even been under HOA jurisdiction. I just want justice, I said into the camera, and to rebuild what was taken from me. That evening I watched from my kitchen window as police cars pulled up to Karen's house. They let her out in handcuffs while neighbors gathered on their perfect lawns to watch. Her face was red with anger until she spotted the news cameras. Then she ducked her head and hurried into the police car. The next weeks passed in a blur of lawyers' offices and courtrooms. The evidence against Karen was overwhelming. Not only did I have the video, but her own text messages to Gerald revealed her plan. I'll take care of the farm problem before the contractors arrive. They'll just think it was part of the cleanup. In court, Karen's lawyer tried to defend her. My client was simply trying to enforce community standards that she believed applied to this property. The judge peered over her glasses. By committing arson, standards that didn't even legally apply to this land. When Karen took the stand, her true colors showed through. That farm was disgusting, she shouted. My property values were dropping every day. Someone had to do something. The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty. My lawsuit against the HOA proceeded separately. With Karen's criminal conviction, they knew they couldn't win and offered to settle, but I didn't want just any settlement. I want enough to rebuild everything I lost, I told my attorney. Plus I wanted in writing that my land will never fall under their control no matter what rezoning happens in the future. The HOA board members looked pale when they signed the agreement. The amount they paid would increase everyone's HOA fees for years to come. Gerald approached me after the signing. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have checked the boundaries myself instead of trusting S-word. Rebuilding took months. I started with the chicken coop, bigger and safer than before. Then came a new greenhouse, a barn, and replanting my garden beds. Each weekend something surprising happened. Neighbors from Oakridge Estates would stop by offering help. I always liked your farm, one woman admitted as she helped plant tomato seedlings. Karen didn't speak for all of us. Lisa Martinez became a regular visitor, bringing her kids to learn about growing vegetables. The HOA isn't all bad, she explained. One day I've been elected the new president, and we're changing the rules. More sustainability, less control. 6 months after the fire, I held an open house at my rebuilt farm. To my amazement, half the neighborhood showed up, curious to see what I'd created. Children squealed with delight at the friendly chickens. Adults admired the neat rows of vegetables and the solar panels on my new barn. Is it true you're going to teach gardening classes? One man asked. I nodded. Every Saturday morning, free for anyone who wants to learn. A year to the day after I found my farm in ashes, I stood watching the sunrise over my thriving land. The garden was more productive than ever. My new heritage chickens laid eggs with deep orange yolks that neighbors now lined up to buy. The greenhouse allowed me to grow vegetables year-round. The same TV reporter who had covered the fire returned for a follow-up story. How do you feel now, looking at all you've rebuilt? She asked. I smiled, watching bees buzz around my flowering apple trees. I learned that good fences and proper property surveys make good neighbors, I said, but also that one person's hatred doesn't define a community. As for Karen, after serving her sentence, she sold her house at a loss. and moved away. The young family who bought it now brings their children to my weekend gardening classes. The HOA still exists, but under Lisa's leadership it's focused on community building rather than control. They even partnered with me to create a neighborhood farmers market in the park. That one legal detail Karen forgot to check the property line that my farm technically stood outside of didn't just save my land, it transformed an entire community and taught us all what really matters. Respecting each other's right to live as we choose.